oppression and persecution and war. And on Hanukkah, we celebrate our survival against these forces, and we really emphasize hope. Hanukkah reminds us that we have been through rough times before, and that whatever we are going through, we will get through our challenges again. So to help us do just that, to help us cope with the particular challenges of this time in our lives and in our world, I'm so excited to introduce our expert for the evening, Dr. Michael Mazius. As you may have read, Dr. Mazius is a clinical psychologist who focuses on neuroscience, academic underachievement, ADHD, parenting, social skills, and family relationships. He's director of North Shore Center and a frequent teacher of groups just like these. We are so honored to be able to learn from him this evening. Dr. Mazius.
Thank you, Rabbi Scheller. Thanks for having me here tonight to talk to this esteemed group. I appreciate it. I have to say that it's still weird talking to a group of people who I cannot see. I recently gave a talk to a group of cybersecurity people, and they wanted to learn about Zoom fatigue. And so one of the findings in the literature on Zoom fatigue is that when you speak to a group or to a person, and you're doing it virtually, you can't see the person's entire being. You can perhaps catch a glimpse of the person, but it's difficult trying to figure out how the person opposite you, if you're relating to him or her virtually, is picking up on your message and or your cues. And so, tonight, as I talk to a group who, unfortunately for me, is faceless, I really can't see anybody's face. I can see Rabbi Scheller's, and that's good. So I see some smiling. I see Dana. I see some smiling. So I know that I'm getting through. But it's tough for me. So because I can't really see who I'm talking to. So when I'm done tonight, I'm hoping that you'll have some questions, so that I'll have a better sense of what is on your minds and whether or not I'm actually, answering your questions and meeting your needs, because that's really what tonight is about. I'm going to try to give you some information, most of which you probably already know. And so what I'm saying, I hope will be reinforcing, and some of which will be new and thought-provoking, and leave you with some takeaways that will be of use to you, in the coming months. Because not to be a downer, and I love Rabbi Scheller's message about hope. So not to be a downer, but these next few months, I suspect are going to be tough for many of us, regardless of age. So what I want to talk about tonight, obviously, is coping with this pandemic, and these sort of like the what to do's and the what not to do's, perhaps. And I'm also going to spend a little time talking about a topic that comes from the leader of our day school, Aaron Lippman, who so wisely said to me when we were talking about what to talk about tonight, you should probably talk about, compassion and empathy. And the word wisdom is well placed, and I'm going to try to explain why as I get sort of towards the end of my presentation. So hang on, and this all hopefully will make greater sense as I say more. I'm going to try to talk. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm going to try to not speed through this and get too much in the weeds and lose people. But I'm going to try to talk for about 40 minutes, and then open it up to questions. And again, I'm hoping that you all will share your questions. Not that I have the answers, but hopefully we'll be able to establish some sort of dialogue that, again, really meets your needs, because that's what I'm hoping to do tonight. So I'm going to talk about how COVID is the perfect storm for the antithesis of mental health. And I'm going to talk too about how we as adults and parents, in my case, a grandparent too, need to be on our A game, because as COVID came, the social capital that our kids are exposed to has been unfortunately on the decline. So we need to be filling an even larger role in their lives right now. I'm going to talk, for those of you who have heard me speak before, I always like to talk about neuroscience. I like to talk about the brain. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the part of our brain that we need to be pulling from right now in an effort to kind of figure out what to do, in an effort to operate wisely and constructively. And I'm going to talk about how the brain isn't necessarily doing us any favors right now because of what's being activated. Then I'm going to speak, I'm going to talk about positive psychology, which is sort of the science of fostering happiness and resilience. And I'm going to talk about how those principles lend themselves very nicely to this time in our history, in our lives right now. I'm going to spend some time talking about the research on wisdom. I'm going to spend a little time talking about just some miscellaneous stuff, some important housekeeping practices that we also need to grow in order to, operate kind of from a healthy perspective, a physically healthy and mentally healthy perspective. And then I'll just, I'll try to summarize. So there's a lot on my agenda, and I'm going to try, again, to kind of cover this, without just kind of speeding through all of it and leaving you with a confused message. I want to be clear. So, okay, COVID. And let me just say too very briefly. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I have my PhD in clinical psychology. I'm originally from Chicago, but I've been living here in Milwaukee for 30 years. So I feel like a Milwaukeean. I'm no longer a Cubs fan or a Bears fan. I've been converted years ago. And so I really feel like a member of this community, and I'm fortunate to be here and to be around so many, inspiring and loving educators and people in general. And I want to welcome too, I know that we've built a bridge tonight with folks from Cincinnati, Ohio, and we're so fortunate and blessed to have you here. So thank you for coming out. And if you come from other walks too, we're happy to have you here. I'm so pleased that you have made time, because it's busy now, and you're also probably tired, and you should be, and you're also probably sick of being on a screen, which I completely understand. So thank you for making some time to come out tonight and listen and participate. So COVID is unfortunately and sadly, I would argue, the perfect storm for the antithesis of mental health. So what do I mean by that? Well, anxiety grows wildly and perfectly under certain conditions. And those conditions seem to be in full force during this COVID season. COVID came on abruptly. I can remember, being in Florida in February and learning about this strange virus in Wuhan, China, and never once thinking about how it's going to make its way here and globally and completely change the way in which we all live. So it came on abruptly, not much warning. Secondly, once it struck, it changed our lives massively and meaningfully, and has deprived us of kinds of reinforcements that we have grown to enjoy without really thinking about it very much. Going out, mingling, hugging and kissing loved ones, just living freely. COVID has taken that away from us. So it has deprived us of naturally occurring and automatic and highly meaningful reinforcements. Three, we don't know how long this is going to last. I mean, vaccines are on the horizon, which is wonderful news. And I think the first person to be vaccinated was vaccinated, I think, early this morning in England, and that's thrilling. So the vaccines are here, but we still don't know how this is all going to get rolled out. how swiftly and smoothly it will be rolled out. So we don't quite know the course of this. And finally, and maybe most importantly, we human beings, we love control. Most of us really love control. Control is sort of like the antidote for anxiety. And right now, we don't have a lot of control. We can't really squeeze the life out of the virus. And again, we can't really sort of speed things up. So an abrupt change, a meaningful change, a change with an unknowing course, and a change which leaves us with the absence of control is really sort of the perfect storm, or a cauldron, if you will, for bubbling up anxiety in all of us, regardless of age. And the research has shown, and again, the research is sort of in its infancy, because even though we've been dealing with this for about 10 months, which feels sort of like, it feels like it's gone fast, but 10 months is a long time. But it hasn't given scientists in the psychological field and perhaps in the pediatric field much time to really do a whole lot of research. We're going to be studying this. I think we psychologists are going to be studying this probably for the next 20 years. But the early research suggests that COVID has fostered an uptick, a meaningful uptick in states, emotional and mental states like anxiety and irritability and depression and loneliness. And so we're all kind of dealing with that. We and our children and our friends and our other loved ones, we're all dealing with this. So before COVID came, I would argue that the curve, if you will, when it comes to mental health or mental illness, if you will, was actually on the decline, because really we have just learned so much over the past several years on how to kind of treat or respond to mental illness in a way that promotes mental health. And this has not only been true for adults, but also for children. I am fortunate to go into schools. I haven't been going into schools. That's probably something that I miss most of all, really, since COVID. But I've been going into schools for years, and I learn from educators what it is they're teaching our children. And our children, even our kindergartners, over the past 5 years, 7 years, have been learning about the brain and mindfulness. We've been sort of learning about kind of a melding between Eastern cultures and Western cultures. And as a consequence of that, as a byproduct of that, mental health has been flourishing. So before COVID, there was good reason to believe that we were all becoming mentally and emotionally and behaviorally healthier. And we will return to that. But right now, we're sort of doing battle with a force that is bringing out not the best in us. And maybe not the worst, but it certainly isn't making us mentally, emotionally, behaviorally healthier. So I would argue right now, because we're all sort of struggling, including our children, our young children, we need to be on our A game. Teachers who I have a deep affinity for, my mother was a teacher. I grew up in a house, with an educator. Our teachers who have the good fortune of still educating our kids in person, or have the fortune of educating kids virtually, have less to go by. I was talking about Zoom fatigue. So if you're wearing a mask and you're a teacher and your kids are wearing masks too, it's harder now to figure out where your kids are, where our kids are emotionally. If you're educating kids from afar, if you're educating them virtually, again, you've got them from sort of like the chest up, if their screens are even on. And so you have a harder time kind of figuring out where your students are, where your kids are mentally and emotionally. And of course, it's many of us are in our homes and not roaming about freely, especially if, in the Midwest, it's getting cold now and it's getting dark early. We don't really have our neighbors to kind of look to help us sort of figure out as parents where our kids are at. So social capital is down, and the need that we play, or the role that we play in our kids' life from a mental health perspective has gone way up. So we have to be on our A game in order to meet our kids' needs. And so tonight, when I talk about positive psychology practices, everything I talk about not only pertains to what we can teach our kids and what we want to try to grow in our kids, but it also pertains to our own selves and what we should be doing for ourselves to make ourselves and to keep ourselves mentally, emotionally, and behaviorally healthy. So everything I talk about not only applies to our kiddos, but also to ourselves. So I hope you'll keep that in mind. I'm going to talk just very briefly about neuroscience. I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain. So I've mentioned this many times before when I come out and talk. You know, the brain, it's amazing, extraordinarily amazing organ, which allows us to do amazing things like create a vaccine or 2 vaccines or maybe 3, 4, 5 vaccines in a very short period of time. It's all a function of our brains and technology and cooperation. So the brain grows from bottom to top and back to front. The last part of the brain to grow or to ripen and really mature is our prefrontal cortex, right here, right behind our forehead. And we need our prefrontal cortex, and our children need their prefrontal cortex in order to problem solve in a flexible and creative way. And so what's interesting to me, among other things about our brain, is that, again, our prefrontal cortex doesn't really ripen until we're about 25 to 30. But that doesn't mean that our prefrontal cortex isn't working and working effectively. It's just that when we're younger, we need help growing it. So the way in which it grows will be sort of ripe and working efficiently as we grow older. So it's important that we as parents stimulate our prefrontal cortex and stimulate our kids' prefrontal cortexes. And again, positive psychology helps us do that, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the other part of our brain that's very fascinating is that we've got a limbic system. And our limbic system lives just behind the eyes and a little down. Sort of like 2 almond-shaped structures in our brain. And again, remember, the brain grows from bottom to top, back to front. So our limbic system is more activated and is more activating than our prefrontal cortex if you're below the age of 25. And again, not to get so into the weeds here, but what I'm trying to say is that our limbic system lights up when we're aroused, when we're emotional, when we're feeling anxious or irritable or sad because we're lonely. And when our limbic system is lit up, interestingly, we don't necessarily connect fully and effectively to our prefrontal cortex, which again is what we need in order to solve problems and go about life in a wise and constructive manner. So our job is to help ourselves and help our kids learn how to figure out what their limbic system is feeling and then tune it down so that we and they can access our and their prefrontal cortex in order to solve problems and navigate challenges constructively and wisely. And positive psychology helps us do that. Again, I'll get to it in a minute. I appreciate your patience. So just to recap very quickly, right now, most of us on any given day wake up feeling anxious or throughout the day find ourselves feeling anxious or irritable or angry or lonely or sad. We're experiencing this with some frequency, with greater frequency, and our kids are too, for obvious reasons. And as a consequence of that, and as a consequence of having sort of like fewer people around to help our kids, although our teachers are trying, obviously, and our relatives are trying, but it's really on us too right now to kind of be present for our kids and to help our kids and to help ourselves operate constructively. So how do we do this? What are sort of like the tricks of the trade? What are sort of the skills we want to grow and sharpen? What are some of the practices in which we need to engage? So there's a very brilliant person out there. His name is Martin Seligman. He's an older gentleman now, and he is a psychologist. And he is the person who came up with the term learned helplessness. If you remember back to your intro psychology days, you probably learned about learned helplessness. Seligman taught us that when we don't feel as if we have control over meaningful events in our lives, we are vulnerable for feeling depressed. And after spending years learning how to treat that, Seligman had another brilliant idea. And that was, instead of studying people who are depressed, I'm going to study, and my lab of students are going to study people who are happy, people who are resilient. Because if we can sort of figure out what makes them tick, we can use that in working with people to help them and ourselves tick better too. And so positive psychology lends itself perfectly to working with ourselves and our kids these days in the face of COVID-19. So what does positive psychology teach us? So positive psychology offers up several practices, a subset of which I'm going to just touch upon tonight. And again, most of this you're probably already doing. Because like much of psychology, it's common sense. But some of this is obvious and at the same time brilliant because we don't seem to remember it much of the time or enough of the time. So practice number one, gratitude. So we hear that word bandied about quite a bit. You know, it's sort of watered down these days because of how often we hear it and or use it. But what is gratitude? Well, gratitude is sort of the opposite of a concept called signal bias. Our brain works on the principle of signal bias, which means we are designed to pick up on danger. And when we pick up on danger, we automatically fight, flee, or freeze in an effort to address and resolve the problem. Why do we do this? Why is this a built-in instinct? Because our job as human beings, among other things, is to keep the species going. If we aren't good at picking up on dangerous stimuli like COVID-19, we are not going to do a good job of keeping our species going. The problem, though, is that many times when we pick up on danger and our limbic system or our amygdala, which is a part of our limbic system, activates, it overactivates. And instead of operating constructively, we, without meaning to, operate in problematic ways. So I'll give you a good example. I don't know about you guys, but 9-10 months ago, I'm not much of a TV watcher, but when COVID-19 appeared, I was spending far too much time gathering information on the television, watching CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. I was trying to be balanced. But the problem was I was spending far too much time because my limbic system sort of hijacked me. It hijacked my brain, and I was accumulating too much information. Instead of calming down and thinking about how to problem solve constructively, I got too caught up in the media cycle. And I forgot to feel grateful for what also exists around me every day. Like we had here in Milwaukee, an amazing fall. So I tried to, and again, I'm from Wisconsin now, so I can say this. This may sound cheesy, but I tried every day to look up at the sky, take a walk, notice nature, spend time with my grandkids. I purposely try to, and I still do this, look for reasons to feel grateful. Our brain needs that. We need to make sure that we are doing that every day, as opposed to spending too much time looking for, sniffing out danger which exists in our world. So it's very important that we practice gratitude in an effortful or conscious way. I have in my group, in my clinic, among like the 20 therapists, I'm definitely of the older vintage. So there are lots of people in my group who are way younger. And I've learned that people in their 20s and 30s, and even people in their 40s, are good at having a gratitude journal. I had never heard of a gratitude journal until I, kind of like started talking to people about gratitude. A gratitude journal is a wonderful way of recording whatever it is we're grateful for, and then referring to it once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, just in an effort to remind yourself of how awesome the world in which we live is. So that's a simple practice. It's very important right now that you think about what it is you're grateful for, and that you ask your children what it is they're grateful for. Children, adolescents who probably don't want to spend much time talking to you. Although these days, since they have fewer people to talk to, you actually may be surprised that they will spend some time talking to you if you listen and come across as non-judgmental, and talk less and listen more. So it's very important to be aware of what it is you're grateful for, and to make sure that you're checking in with yourself, and that you're asking your kids if they're checking in with themselves too, a couple of times a day, every day, to think about what makes us happy and what we're grateful for. So that's practice 1. Practice 2. I was in, again, last year, sort of like the good old days. I was in Santa Fe at a conference given by a gentleman, Donald Meichenbaum, who is probably in his mid-80s now. Because he's sort of like the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, and I wanted to hear what was on his mind. And he talked about another pillar of mental health, and that is the power of narrative. He said that we're all storytellers, that we all have a story to tell. Many of us enjoy listening to stories, reading books because of the stories we learn, but we also have our own stories. And so we all have our own narratives. It's very important right now, according to Seligman, Meichenbaum, and other heavyweights in the field of psychology. It's very important right now that the story we tell ourselves is all about grit. Angela Duckworth wrote a book, Grit, came out maybe a couple of years ago. If you haven't read it, you're probably going to have time this winter to read or listen to podcasts. Pick up her book. She coincidentally is a student of Martin Seligman. And so she wrote about the importance of facing challenge in ways that are all about kind of approach. Like, instead of avoiding challenge, which is something that our brains sometimes want us to do when our limbic system is overly active, it's important that we remind ourselves that we need to face challenge with strength. And I would argue everybody who is on this talk right now, who is listening to me, can look themselves in the eyes, and our kids can do the same thing, and conclude that we are up every morning dealing with this. We are up every morning heading to school, heading to work, heading to our office, in our bedroom, or in some room of our house. Our kids are doing the same. We are doing it with masks, without masks. We right now are a story of resilience, all of us. And it's really important that we remind ourselves of that frequently, because that is the narrative of our lives right now. And it's important that we know that. It's important that our children know that. It's important that we are failing up, as it were, like Duckworth likes to talk about, and Carol Dweck, who wrote Growth Mindset. We are facing challenge with dignity and fearlessness, and that needs to be part of our narrative right now. So please keep that in mind and talk to your kids about that as well, so they walk around feeling that way too. A little bit of swagger is good right now. So that's 2. 3, I could talk about each of these for an hour, but as I'm sort of rushing through this, and I'm sorry for that, but I hope this is of meaning to you all. 3, after talking to Aaron and thinking about empathy and compassion, and talking to Dana about it to help me sort of like write it in a more eloquent way, I dipped into the literature, and what did I find? I found that wisdom, and it's important that we operate wisely right now, contains a handful of components. One of which is self-awareness. It's very important that right now we check in with ourselves frequently, and we ask ourselves, what are we feeling? What is going on in this mind and body of ours? What are we feeling? Are we feeling happy? Are we feeling excited? Are we feeling sad? Are we feeling lonely? Are we feeling irritable? Are we feeling anxious? It's very important that we check in with ourselves. Our elementary school and middle school teachers do a wonderful job of helping our young children understand their emotions. Some people are perhaps born with a U gene, sort of like the understanding gene, the self-awareness gene. Most of us, though, have to grow the practice in order to get good at naming where we're at. And of course, where we're at, mood-wise, can change, and often does change frequently throughout the day. So right now, it's very important that we know how we feel and that we give language to that internally or to ourselves and with our children and with our loved ones. It's very important right now that we show ourselves and people we care about that feeling vulnerable, saying what you feel, naming it, and going public with it is akin for many of us to feeling vulnerable. It's very important that we allow ourselves to feel vulnerable right now. And it's very important that we invite our children and our adolescents to feel vulnerable with us too, and to share what they're feeling, which is why I was saying a little while ago, it's very important right now that less is more. And by that, I mean, we talk less and we listen better. Because when we engage in that kind of communication practice, our kids, even our adolescents, are more likely to talk to us. So we want to be aware of what we're feeling, and then we want to practice what we need to do well in order to tame our feelings when what we're feeling is irritability, anger, and anxiety. Because again, when we feel irritability, anger, loneliness, sadness, anxiety, our limbic system, not our prefrontal cortex, but our limbic system is activated. And if we don't know when we're feeling like that, we're probably not going to get good at doing something simple but difficult. And again, this is where sort of like Eastern practices meet Western practices. Eastern practices teach us that when we are revved up emotionally, it's very important that we use that as a cue to breathe. To breathe in and then breathe out more slowly, ideally through our nostrils. And when we do that, we literally activate our parasympathetic nervous system. And when we activate our parasympathetic nervous system, what does that do? That turns down the amplification of our limbic system. And when our limbic system is turned down, our prefrontal cortex opens up, allowing us to operate constructively, And again, this is sort of like why these processes are involved in the practice of wisdom or wise thinking. So it sounds simple, but for most of us, it's only likely to happen if we practice it, and with our kids, if we teach it. And our kids have heard this a lot. Most of the time when I talk to little kids or older kids and I ask them what they do when they feel angry, honestly, 8 out of 10 kids, even little ones. I talked to a little boy today who he's 8. And he's a very emotional, he's a sweet, cute, emotional kiddo. And I asked him, do you ever feel angry? And, he looked at me and he said to me, we're doing this virtually, obviously, he said to me, yes. And I asked him, when you feel angry, what do you do? And and this is my first meeting with him. And he actually typed it in the chat because we were using a Doxy platform, which is a HIPAA compliant platform. And he typed in the letters BRETH. So he spelled it wrong. But more importantly, he got it right. He said, breathe. And this is a highly excitable 8-year-old kiddo. And I hear this from lots of kids. So our kids know this, and we know this too. But when our limbic system is lit up, we get hijacked and we forget. So we have to practice. So right now, it's really important that we tune in. We know how we feel. We verbalize how we feel. We teach our kids or implore our kids to do the same thing. And we remember that when we are emotionally upset, that is our cue not to talk, but to breathe. And then after we breathe, we will be in a better place to think about what to do. So it's very important. This is positive psychology at its best. It's very important that we work on this too. So A, we want to think about what we're grateful for. We want to remind ourselves to do that. B, we want to remind ourselves when we look in the mirror that we are amazing human beings who are all about practicing resilience right now. We're all about grit. C, we want to be very tuned in, and we want to help our kids be very tuned in to what we're feeling and what they're feeling. And we want to remember to breathe. And D, and again, I could spend 2 hours on this, but I'm going to try to make this quick. It's not easy. This is very hard. This is probably the most difficult practice in positive psychology. And that is, we want to be very good at operating mindfully. I'm just going to check my phone to make sure that I'm not talking too much, which of course I am. So I'm almost done. We want to practice mindfulness. So what does that mean? What that means is we want to know at any given moment where our thinking is. And we want to be exquisitely tuned into when our mind is drifting, because for whatever reason, our attention span wanders in all of our minds. Our attention span wanders. I remember when I used to drive to work, I have like a 10-minute drive to work, and I used to try to train my brain on the way to work to think mindfully. And I can tell you, if I was grading myself, I would give myself a D- on most days, because my mind wanders, and that's true for all of us. But the key when it comes to mindfulness is being aware of when your mind is wandering. And it's really important right now that we are aware of when our mind is wandering, and that when we catch our minds wandering, we remind ourselves to focus on the moment, the person we're talking to, the person we're talking to virtually, the problem on which we're working, the school problem on which we're working. Because if we don't do that and our mind wanders and we're feeling anxious, interestingly, we're going to begin to worry. We're going to run the risk of catastrophizing. We're going to feel, for whatever reason, upset or angry or sad. When we have good mind control, and again, this is a practice, when we're aware, we bring ourselves back to the present, then we are in our prefrontal cortex, and we can remind ourselves that It's important right now to think flexibly and to think with optimism. We can catch ourselves when we aren't thinking flexibly. It's interesting, when you're anxious, you're likely to operate in a controlling manner because our brains teach us, unfortunately, that when we're controlling, when we're dotting I's, when we're crossing T's, when we're trying to operate with perfectionism, then we're in the sweet spot. Then we can calm down. But that's actually the antithesis of how things really work. So when you find your mind wandering, try to get it back to the present. When you find your mind catastrophizing or worrying or thinking negatively, that's your cue to literally tell yourself, okay, I'm off track. Get back in the moment. Take some deep breaths. And we want to talk to our kids about doing this too, so they get better at it too, because it's a practice. It's a skill. And we only get better by practicing. And that's what we need to be doing right now, living in the moment and focusing on the person opposite us or whatever it is we're working on. Okay, almost done. This is the part that Aaron brought to my attention. And again, I could spend so much time on this, but I can't. So I'm going to just sort of I'm going to try to just sort of highlight the important point. So wisdom, when we learn about wisdom, what constitutes wisdom? Again, it's self-awareness. It's tuning in, knowing what you feel. And then, and only then, only after you've done that and you've acknowledged what you feel, then you can realize that you're not the only one who is feeling something difficult right now. There are people in your life, people in your circle, people in your neighborhood, people in your family who are feeling all sorts of things too, like fear, sadness, loneliness. And that is your cue. Once you start empathizing, that is your cue to go from, as we say at the day school in Milwaukee, me to we. That's our cue to be compassionate and to think about how we can build back community with people who we know and love, or even people who we don't know, but care about right now, because we're thinking about people other than us. We've tuned in and then we can turn out. So this is your time to reach out to people. If you have older people in your family who are alone, or I was even talking to a group of people today who have kids in college who are not home yet and actually are really struggling because of their quarantine and the need to get tested multiple times a week. And, the reality that they're getting up in the morning, they're working at their desk in their dorm room and then going back to bed. It's really hard. If you know people who are having a hard time right now, reach out to them. Build the routine of reaching out to them. Do it once a week for 10 minutes. If you have elderly people, I shouldn't say elderly because I'm getting older, but people who are older in your life and they're not good with technology, go old school. Make a telephone call. Don't text. Make a telephone call. A 10-minute reach out will make a difference in the lives of people who unfortunately are not in their prefrontal cortex enough of the time, but instead they're kind of living in the middle part of their brain and feeling sad and alone. It's really important right now that we exercise compassion. Also, it's winter time. And I read something recently, I thought, brilliant piece on how this winter, it's really important if you are living in a cold weather climate that you think flexibly. Again, flexible thinking emanates from and resides in the prefrontal cortex. So what do I mean by thinking flexibly? Instead of staying indoors and seeking warmth, It's really important that we get out every single day when it's light outside, and that we, I don't like this word because it sort of sounds like control, but we implore our kids, we demand that our kids layer up and go outside. Some people may disagree with what I'm about to say, but it's really important that we implore our kids, and they're going to want to do this, to call one friend and invite him or her over in the winter, even during the school day. Even if it means you miss a little school, you get outside every day for a half an hour to an hour, and you mask up and you engage in socially distant interaction. So you're getting out and you're connecting, because that's really the last piece of this positive psychology practice. It's very important right now that we connect. Early on, like in the early days of COVID, there were articles coming out of a lab at Harvard. Social distance is not emotional distance. So it's really important that we tune in and we know where we're at, and then we turn out, not tune out, but turn out, and we reach out to people virtually, if necessary, and if possible, physically. And even in the winter, we operate creatively by layering up and getting out and doing it every single day. The American Academy of Pediatrics recently came out and said we need to be outside for an hour every day. And we can do this even though it's cold. So it's really important that we practice all of these positive psychology practices. Okay, just a couple more things very quickly. It's very important right now. Most of us, I know I am, are sleep deprived. It's very important. Like we mental health workers, we're getting up earlier than usual. We're working later than usual, because it's important that we do this right now. So we're sleep deprived. We need to make sure that we are getting enough sleep, and the same is true of our kids. We need to make sure that we're eating healthy. In the wintertime and when we're stressed, we like to eat carbohydrates. It's really important that we eat fruit and vegetables and that we stay healthy, because a healthy body fosters a healthy mind. The mind and the body obviously are connected. It's very important that we exercise. Get out and walk, except when it's super icy out. But get out and exercise every day. Do something, even if it's just walking. And finally, and of course this pertains to adults, but also to adolescents. Right now, the research is showing us that substance use is on the rise. No surprise. People are drinking more. People are using cannabis more. Kids, adolescents, I say, are vaping more. Why? Because our amygdala is activated and we're stressed. It's really important that we are aware of what our relationship is like right now with substances, and we tone it down, because we need to engage in constructive, creative, positive psychology practices in order for us to be, stay, and grow healthy, physically and mentally. Okay, one last thing, then I will stop. A recent study out of the University of Wisconsin in Madison, there's an amazing psychologist out there, a neuroscientist, Richie Davidson. He runs a lab. It's called the Center for the Investigation of Healthy Minds. Great website, lots of cool and useful apps on the website and articles which come out. I encourage all of you to take a look at it here and there. His study, his lab did a meta-analysis, kind of looking at like a lot of studies looking at kind of what constitutes mental health. Again, sort of like Seligman-esque, looking at what are healthy people, what are happy people, what are resilient people doing. And it's interesting, that study said that we need to be right now self-aware. We need to know what we're thinking and feeling as it changes, and we need to help our kids become more tuned in as well. That's one. Two, we need to be aware of where our thinking is heading. Are we focused? Is our mind wandering? And if our mind is wandering, where is it wandering to? Is it wandering to healthy places, or is it wandering to unhealthy places. And we need to remember that we can reel it back in and get focused. 3, we need to be cognitively flexible right now. We do not want to be controlling. We do not want to be perfectionistic. We want to be nimble and flexible. So we want to pay attention to whether or not that's our reality. And if not, we need to work on growing it. 4, we need to be optimistic. The coronavirus, I can't tell you when it's going to end, but we all, I think, will agree it is time limited. It will not be here forever. It is a time-limited phenomenon. It has come and it will go. And our new normal will be different from our old normal, but it will be a better normal. So we need to be thinking in an optimistic way. Second to last, we need to have a positive narrative. We need to look in the mirror every day and we need to tell ourselves, not only we are beautiful, but we need to tell ourselves that we are amazing. We are resilient because we are. And we need to remind our kids, they need to say the same thing. A little swagger right now goes a long way. And finally, me to we need to connect. We need not only to tune in, but we need to turn out. And we need to build community within our families and outside of our families so that social capital once again is on the rise. Together, we can grow our mental health, our emotional health, and our behavioral health. So, well, that's a lot. I hope your mind didn't wander too much tonight. I hope this was helpful. And now please share with me and with each other what is on your mind. Let's hear some questions. I certainly don't have all the answers, and I don't know that I have any answers, but I'd like to weigh in and hear what's on your mind, and hopefully I can be of more help to you individually. So please.
So this was terrific. Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions.
Good.
Yeah, Jamie, our school nurse, is wondering, how do we decrease COVID stigma? She's had quite a number of patients and family members apologizing they have COVID and repeating that they've done everything to stay safe. There's a component of grief and loss when someone finds out if they are COVID positive. How can we as a community uplift each other?
Okay, so that's a really great question. I didn't even get into tonight, and I think this is going to sort of touch tangentially on that. But so I mean, obviously, if somebody has had COVID, has COVID, and feels guilty about it, not only worried about it, but guilty about it, it's sort of obvious. But you know, I mean, he or she needs to be able to talk about it, and he or she needs, most importantly, to feel as if he or she has been heard. Because when you talk to somebody who you feel is really listening to you, all of a sudden you feel obviously less alone. And that in and of itself, for most human beings, produces a greater sense of happiness and support. So I just think that by letting them know that even though they have COVID, we still want to be with them, and maybe we want to be with them even more, and that we check in on them, that in and of itself, I think, will make someone feel not good, but perhaps better and clearly less embarrassed about what has happened. Secondly, and this was sort of Aaron's point when I talked to him, I think this is a really good point. It's really easy, I think, right now. I know I'm super guilty of this, and I'm not proud of this. It's really easy to walk around outside with my mask and to look at people who aren't wearing masks. And again, I'm not proud of this. It's easy for me to respond in a judgmental way. Like I know I can hear myself, just responding in a judgmental way. I can feel myself growing angry. It's really important right now that when that happens, we remind ourselves, A, what that's probably really about. And it's probably really about anxiety. And B, we use that as a cue to remind ourselves that everybody is doing what they think is right and best. And no one of us has the best answer, the perfect answer, the right answer. In fact, I would argue that the best answer right now is that we respond, we always or often respond, we can't always do it, but we respond with understanding, love, kindness, and support. I think if that's your cue, when you find you're not on that page, that in and of itself will help you respond in these positive ways. And that will be good for you, and that will be good for the people or person opposite you. So that's a long-winded answer, but I hope that's helpful.
Okay, we also have someone wondering, what are some tips about being more patient with our children when we ourselves are feeling more irritable?
Sure. So, well, two things come to mind immediately. First of all, again, the power of breathing, the power of self-awareness and breathing, and the power of like self-awareness and separating. So when you feel your amygdala or your limbic system activate, instead of becoming amygdala hijacked, which means, you aren't operating with patience, but instead you're operating emotionally. And again, you don't really find emotional responses in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is designed to regulate our emotionality. But tuning in, knowing what you feel, and using that as a cue to breathe and maybe walk away will actually make it easier for you, not easy, but easier for you to respond with patience. And secondly, we're all human, so we're all imperfect beings. And when you, like I, often, unfortunately, forget to practice what I preach and operate angrily, it's really important that you do two things afterwards. A, you do some repair work with your child because of how you're feeling. You model for your child the importance of apologizing, and you model for your child the truth, which is we're all imperfect human beings. And B, and this is something that many of us don't do enough, I would argue, you forgive yourself, because this is not the time to beat up on yourself. This is not the time to try to be perfect. This is not the time to grow guilt and shame. This is the time to be kind to yourself. So if you operate in a way in which you're in a way in which you wish you hadn't, this is the perfect time when the dust settles, after you've breathed and or after you've taken some deep breaths and you've calmed yourself and you've engaged in some repair work, or even before you get to the repair work. Please take a moment or two to forgive yourself and remind yourself, you have ample opportunities, in the time ahead of you to be better, to operate in a better, more patient and kinder way. When we beat up on ourselves, we actually make it harder for ourselves to achieve our goal states. When we're kind to ourselves and give ourselves the opportunity to try and try again, exercise grit, then we often, if not always, end up behaving better.
Okay, we also have a question wondering, how do you give up the control? If controlling helps, cleaning the room, organizing work for the team, etc.
Wow, these are great questions. I wish I had someone to hand them off to. So let me take a stab. First of all, having
I'm not sure about that.
That was I think that was Siri. Sorry. Having a modicum of control is important. So I guess I don't want to come across as someone who believes that we need to completely let go of all controls. We just want to be kind of in touch with how much control we're trying to exercise. So, and as human beings, we are ritualistic organisms. We like rituals, we like routines. That's true from birth, actually. So if there are some things that you like to do that make you feel like you have some control, like organizing your desk, cleaning your room, putting away dishes, whatever it is, engage in it, but engage in it with an eye towards compulsiveness. So if you find that you're doing it more than usual, or if you find that you're doing it more than you really need to, that's your cue to, and again, this is going to sound so simple, it's so not. That's your cue to stop and live with the anxiety you're likely to feel, because you're going to find that anxiety, like all of our emotions, anxiety is an emotion, always has a shelf life. It comes and then it goes. And so if we can sit with the anxiety that we feel when we feel it and not do what our brain is instructing us to do, we will find that the anxiety we feel inevitably dissipates, making it easier for us not to be so controlling. So that's just a very important exercise. Again, our brain, I would argue, in so many ways is our frenemy. You know, we sort of like, it makes us want to do things that aren't always constructive or useful. So pay attention to the degree to which you're operating in a controlling way. And then if you find that it's really too much and you know it, try to force yourself not to just do it, to do the opposite. And you'll see that actually whatever you were feeling will go away, and you'll feel a sense of calm again, and it will be easier for you not to be so controlling. Easier said than done, but again, like any skill, practice makes, I don't want to use this word perfect, practice makes near perfect.
All right, we have another question. How do we help and encourage our little children, like 3-year-olds, express themselves and feel all the sad feelings about not being in school and seeing family and friends?
Wow, so 3, you know, is sort of a magic age for lack of a better word, insanity. Actually, 2 and 2.5 to 3 and 3.5 to 4, generally speaking, are periods in which our little ones often are not very regulated emotionally and can be extremely controlling. So whether your child is 2.5 to 3 or 3.5 to 4 or young like that, or even into his or her, you know, kind of like later childhood, it's just really important, I think, that when, you know, they're feeling something palpable to them and palpable to you, A, you let them feel it. B, you put a word to it, because when you're 3, even though your vocabulary is growing, I mean, you might want to ask them, what are you feeling? You know, you might want to give them some words, kind of turn it into a multiple choice test to make it a little easier, although multiple choice tests usually aren't easier. But you want to kind of help them come up with the words so that they can name it, because you've got to name it in order to tame it. Thank you, Danny Siegel, who also does great work. And you can find his YouTube videos out there. They're super helpful. So, excuse me, super helpful. But you want to just sort of let them be. And you want to, as you let them be and put a word to it, you want to, if they'll let you, be close to them. So you want to give them time to feel. You want to treat their feelings as if they're normal, because they are. You want to be with them if they'll let you be with them. You don't want to talk much. You don't want to irritate their brain by talking. You just want to sort of let them be. If they want you to hug them, hug them. Do not be afraid of attending to their emotions. Sometimes we think if we attend to these emotions, we are empowering them, we are reinforcing them, but actually we aren't. We're just helping our kids learn to live with them. And if our kids don't want us around, and they aren't going to behave in ways that are destructive or aggressive, give them the space they need so that their emotions come, grow, and then pass. So I hope that's helpful. It's important too, because right now our kids have lots of reasons to feel upset. And because they're younger than we are and they don't really understand what they're looking at like we do, life can be even more confusing and upsetting and anxiety provoking for them. So let them feel what they feel. Make it okay for them.
Just got another one that's
Good.
tricky. I have a few relationships where our comfort levels around COVID are quite different. I'm generally pretty cautious and have some friends and family who are more relaxed about wearing masks, gathering, etc. How do you recommend navigating these differences while preserving relationships and bring us closer?
Right, so that's really great too. So again, I hope that this is helpful. I just find, I mean, so many of us have close friends and family members who are operating differently. than we are. And I love the word differently. They're not, again, it's easy for me to say this because, you know, I'm sort of taking off my judgmental hat and trying to be constructive. They're not operating better. They're not operating worse. They're operating differently. But if their different ways of operating make you uncomfortable, and you are unwilling presently to be with them physically, and they want to be with you, again, this is not sort of like one size fits all. This doesn't always work, but I find that if you level with them, if you tell them, this may sound judgmental, but it's really not meant to be. So I hope you don't take it that way. You know, I'm feeling a little neurotic these days, and I have my way of doing things, and other people have their ways of doing things. And I'm not saying I'm right and they're wrong. I'm just saying that this is what I need right now. So right now, I need not to share physical space with you, but I certainly want to share virtual space with you. And I hope you will grant me that privilege, because right now I need you. And I hope you can empathize with my neurosis, put it on yourself, not on them. And again, I have found that this sort of approach has actually had beneficial effects with people I treat, people I see, people I don't treat professionally, but people I know, and for myself as well. So I hope that you can deliver that message in your own way and find that it fosters success.
Good. And then it looks like our last question is, somebody was just wondering why you say breathe through the nostrils.
Okay, so that's sort of like, I wish I could tell you what the neurophysiology is behind that, but what I can say is that just from what I've read, breathing out through your nose, you can breathe out through your mouth, that's fine too, but breathing out through your nose and making sure that when you breathe out, when you exhale, it's longer than the inhalation, that for whatever reason turns on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our brain and body. It's the nervous system that we use to reduce tension, lower cortisol. So Google it and you'll probably get a better response, but that's the mechanism for promoting relaxation, tuning down our limbic system, and opening up widely our prefrontal cortex, which is where we need to be right now in order to kind of navigate, again, in a wise and healthy way. So let me just say, first of all, I appreciate everybody coming out and tuning in. And I hope that this talk reinforced practices you and your kids are doing, practices that you're teaching to your kids. And I hope too that this talk taught you some novel and interesting practices that you'll use on yourself and try out with your kids. And again, this is really all about practicing to get good, not practicing to have success the first time out. So if you try and you feel like you failed, I don't love that word, but if you try and you feel like you failed, it's really important that we keep trying and we keep working at this and on ourselves and with our kids, so that these practices not only will be enforced now, but will last beyond the pandemic, keeping ourselves in a mentally and physically and emotionally healthy place. So again, me to we, build community. That's really what it's all about right now, to get through and get past this pandemic. So thank you so much for letting me speak. I really appreciate it. Hope this was helpful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mazius. Thank you everybody for attending. I have recorded tonight's session, so I will download that and we'll email everyone as well as a recap. So thank you all. Have a very good night.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.